Well said. Very nice.
Just up here is better than miles.
And once it's, stop. Walk around.
All right, everybody, welcome. Welcome back to another fruit set meeting. I kind of can't believe we're already here again, but here we are. So we have our usual cast of characters with us again today. We got folks from the Hudson Valley Research Lab joining us. We also have Terrence joining us on Zoom again. So we're going to go ahead and start out with the thinning review portion of the meeting. And before I turn things over to Terrence, I'm going to talk about what I've been seeing around the county as I was driving around this morning. I was telling Ann I got wet up to about mid-thigh this morning out in some of the orchards. The rain finally stopped around 11:30, so I got to take my time and have a good leisurely stroll through some of the orchards. So let you know what I'm seeing out there. So overall, you know, not too out of the ordinary for us, but it always kind of amazes me. You can drive 10, 15 miles up the road in Saratoga County and see something very different in terms of bud phenology and thinning conditions. So I try to hit as many orchards as I can, work my way around the county. And with that, it's pretty similar to what we always see. So pretty good spread in terms of overall fruit phenology at this point and fruit size. I'm seeing some kings as big as 14 millimeters on max in the southern portion of the county. Well, you go about 10 miles up the road and things are still at 6, 7 millimeters. So pretty spread out, even within the same variety. And then, between different varieties, obviously there we're seeing a big spread too. And I think that's probably being made even worse this year just by the fact that it's been such a long drawn out bloom period. So looking at some Snapdragon earlier today, I mean, you could see some kings that were getting up to 12 millimeters, and look at a different cluster that must have opened up on the tail end of the week and they're still at 6 to 7. So really big spread in terms of kings, even on the same tree. So I think that is going to, complicate things a little bit more for us as well. Looking at overall fruit set, I know when we met online last week, we were talking about the poor pollination weather that we had throughout bloom. We had those cool rainy conditions, much like today. And there was going to be some concern about how things were going to be setting up. So now that we're a week later, I think we have a better sense of how things are starting to look. Still, a little hard to tell on those later varieties, but I do think when you look more to the southern end of the county and more to the eastern side of Saratoga County, I think it looks like things have set up pretty nicely. There might be a lateral or two that didn't set up. But for the most part, in a lot of the different varieties I'm seeing there, it looks like we still got things set up pretty nicely, and there's still probably some thinning to be done. Really on the max that I was looking at, the McCowns are set up really strongly. Cortlands are still set up pretty strongly. The New York 1 block that I was looking at still looks like they're set pretty strongly. And I think we're still going to have some more thinning that needs to be done. For on blocks of Honeycrisp, and it's going to depend on how your bloom came back. Some blocks that, bloomed a bit lighter. You have to look to find those trees that were on, but those clusters are still set up pretty well. I am finding on a couple of those, it looks like there are some kings that are a little bit on the weaker side, but even within those clusters, usually there's still 3, 4 laterals that look like they've set up pretty strongly. Gala are in a pretty similar situation. For blocks that were really nice and on, I think there's still plenty of laterals there that can use some more thinning. What's interesting to me about Gala this year, I'm seeing this in a couple blocks here, also a couple blocks in the Champlain Valley. Even though I tend to think they're pretty reliable croppers that come back every year, I am seeing a couple off blocks here and there, not just in the lower halves of the trees, but in a couple of cases throughout the trees. So definitely don't assume that your Galas are going to be on just because they always are. We are seeing a few blocks where there have been some return bloom issues even on them this year. So we're looking through there carefully, but similar to the Honeycrisp, in your blocks that are on, I think those laterals are still holding pretty strongly. So I think they could use some more thinner as well. Again, I mentioned for the most part, I think Max and Cortlands look pretty good. There are a couple of blocks here and there where the bottoms, I think, have thinned out a little more strongly. And there, I think that might be one of those cases where maybe they were a little bit on the later side and things just never set there all that much to begin with. Then I also had a look at some Pink Lady as well, just to have a look there. Those seem to be thinning down a little bit better, or maybe they didn't set quite as strongly. There, I'd say I'm seeing a king and maybe one or so laterals that still look pretty good. And looking across the trees, I would say it looks like they've thinned down a little bit more, or maybe didn't set up to begin with. So all that being said, I think thinning is always really difficult for this region because we do have so many varieties and there is always that spread in phenology. So the reminder I always like to give is to look through things closely and really make that determination on that block by block basis. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Terrence to walk us through his recommendations about how we can thin this crop down this year. If you could switch that over, Terrence, it's showing presenter mode right now.
Hang on just a minute. How's that?
Looks good.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be back with you discussing some of the issues and suggested strategies for thinning at the 10 to 13 millimeter stage. This cold weather that we're in right now means that we're going to delay the thinning until next week. But as we look at the temperature forecasts, I think you'll have a window Monday and Tuesday and maybe Wednesday to put the thinners on. I appreciate Mike's sort of update on what he's seeing fruit sizes. The very drawn out bloom period gives us a range of sizes, but I think that we're getting close to the right timing starting tomorrow and in through Tuesday. But since tomorrow and Saturday and Sunday are kind of poor weather, it'll be Monday and Tuesday. But I think we'll still have a really nice window to put thinners on. If you're involved in Memorial Day activities with your family and don't want to spray that day, I think Tuesday will be a great day to spray as well. As you recall, this is a third big step in thinning after the blossom thinning and the petal fall thinning. This is the money thinner moment in which we expect to get bulk of our thinning done. And there's good news and bad news because we don't have the perfect weather to get maximum thinning. But hopefully if you got some thinning from your petal fall spray, which I hope you did, you should have, then you'll probably be in pretty good shape. What I see so far, and Mike added to what because I haven't really seen the orchards, but just based on his eyes, that we really didn't have any frost damage this year. That poor bee flight during most of bloom gave us some concern that we wouldn't have the king set, but Mike has seen pretty decent king set, but there are some places where the kings did not set. Nevertheless, if there's 2 to 3 laterals, we're still going to want to thin. Now, the petal fall spray, if you applied the spray as I was suggesting last week, went on under relatively warm conditions with a significant carbohydrate deficit and likely gave very good thinning. Not enough, but substantial thinning that got us well along our road to getting the proper crop load. Now, remember that at petal fall last week, fruits are not quite as sensitive as they are now and will be early next week. But still, the carbohydrate situation was good for us to get thinning. And I hope that you were able to get the thinners on in that window that we said last week. But this coming spray will go on under cool conditions and with a carbohydrate surplus. Even though temperatures on Monday and Tuesday will be better, it will still be under a carbohydrate surplus. So I wanted to present again the carbohydrate balance results for Clifton Park. This is sort of in the middle between north and south in Albany County, Saratoga County. If you look at bloom date, on say the 4th of May, we had a relatively narrow petal fall thinning window starting on about May 13th and 14th, 15th, and 16th of last week. And you can see that there's a relatively good carbohydrate deficit of around minus 40 grams. That should have given us relatively good response from the thinners. But since then, we've had this atrocious, cool, rainy period that has given us now a carbohydrate surplus for almost the last week. And as we get close to the thinning window, it's still going to remain positive. Now, the window will extend beyond the line in this graph, which is tomorrow. And so the window will continue Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. And we don't have the data for those dates yet. But I predict, based upon what we see in the table in the bottom, that it's not going to be favorable for thinning. If you look at this table on the bottom, we see that May 22nd today, on a daily basis, we have a positive carbohydrate balance. And you say, how is that possible? The predicted temperature for Clifton Park today is 49 degrees. And the amount of light is 6.6. That's extremely low. But still, at 49 degrees, the trees and the fruit are growing so slow, they require very little carbohydrate, so there's a surplus. Even tomorrow, when it's predicted to be 53 and a little bit more light, we still have a surplus. But as we move forward, on Saturday, 24th, Sunday, 25th, 26th, 27th to Tuesday, the 27th, we'll get up into the high 60s on Monday and Tuesday, but light level also goes up. And so at those temperatures and good light level, we still are going to have a surplus of carbohydrates. Now, if you look at the last column of numbers, you'll see that I put on here starting at 200-degree days, going to 246. The typical window we like to hit for this timing is between 200 and 250. So that's these days. Yesterday, the window opened, continues today, tomorrow, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday before we'll get out of the window. But if you look at the temperatures, we're really looking at the best days of Monday and Tuesday to get the thinners on. But even all thinners going on Tuesday, the 27th, will still probably give the best possible result. But even so, it's going to be a limited response. That's why I'm really hoping you got significant thinning out of your petal fall thinning sprays. And when you look at these daily amounts, there's nothing in there that indicates we've got a good deficit, which we need for good thinning. So this is kind of a review of what I've already said, but I wanted to put it up here just in black and white. We expect that at this fruit size, between 10 and 13 millimeters, thinners have their strongest effect. And that's been shown by us over a 20-year period on the same treatments every year. And they're usually quite effective. But this year, with a positive carbohydrate balance, we had the same situation a couple of years ago, they'll be less effective. So the carbohydrate model indicates that this surplus will give relatively poor thinning. Now, what do you do? Well, the model allows you to adjust the timing. And so this year, the best timing is late in the window. Monday and Tuesday, we'll almost be at 250-degree days by the end of the day Tuesday. And then the rate. The model allows you to increase the rate by 15 or 30%. And with the deficits we're going to get, and although I can't really see what the average deficit is going to be for Monday and Tuesday, I'm expecting it to be positive so that you'll increase rates by 30%. Now, that's the real value of the carbohydrate model. It gives you those options is to try to wait out this cold, rainy period and then to increase the rate. Let's talk about the thinning options that I would suggest for 2025 at this timing. They're really combinations of products, NA and Carbaryl, BA and Carbaryl. Also, we've tested for many years BA and NAA, works well. And the most newest combination, which is Maxell and Exceed. And I'll just pause for a moment and say Exceed is a very interesting thinning compound, but by itself, it's relatively weak. And we have not been able to really show it be very successful unless it's mixed with Maxell. Now, there's two things. Maxell has a lot of surfactant in it, which helps Exceed, but also just they work together. The Exceed produces ethylene, and the Maxell separately stops the translocation of carbohydrate to the weak fruits, and together they have given us very good responses. Now, for those main varieties, I listed several of them here. This would be my suggestion. Gala almost always needs a lot of thinner at this timing. Now, I hadn't seen what Mike was seeing with some Gala blocks coming back light. So that would temper my suggestion here. But for blocks that have good bloom and good set, even if you got fairly good response at petal fall, a full dose of Maxell and 7 would be optimum. Now, I'm suggesting this year because of the cool, the 60, excuse me, the 60 degrees we're going to get Monday and Tuesday is not warm. I wish it was 75 to 80. So and those temperatures are going to give a muted response. So I'm suggesting you put 2 pints of Carbaryl on this year instead of the 1 pint per 100. That Carbaryl will sit on, the extra Carbaryl will sit on the leaf, and if you get more little bits of rain like we've been getting, it will re-wet and reabsorb and give better thinning. Now for Honeycrisp that bloomed well, and I would say that some blocks didn't bloom well because of biennial bearing, in this particular timing, I like the 3 ounces of NA per tree row, 100 gallons of tree row volume dilute, and then again, the 2 pints of Carbaryl. McIntosh is easier to thin, and so just 2 ounces of NA and 2 pints of Carbaryl will do a great job. Empire works very well with Maxell. I like it with Maxell the best, but it takes a relatively high dose where you had good fruit set on Empire. The caveat with Empire is to make sure the kings are there. It's a variety that's very susceptible to king damage. If the kings are there, this is the rate I like. If the kings are not there, then I like a lower rate of 48 ounces. I didn't list it here, but I'll say it verbally. Now, Spurdelicious is another one that's very finicky in the sense that king flowers are very susceptible to damage. If the kings are there, it can be pruned or thinned very well with a high rate of Maxell of 64 ounces. But again, with the 2 pints of 7, because we're looking at a carbohydrate surplus, and we've learned by sad experience that we never get the thinning we want in years with these carbohydrate surpluses. Now, Fuji is a case where we want to avoid NA on all the sprays, and so the Maxell high rate works very well on Fuji. I want to review again, just because this is so critical, that every time you put on a thinner, you have to calculate a concentration factor and then use that in determining how much of the product you put in the tank. I say this almost every meeting, but with fungicides and insecticides, it doesn't really matter because you're trying to just coat the leaf. But with PGRs, their response depends on how much is absorbed into the plant. And so the amount of micrograms of either NA or Maxell that gets absorbed into the plant is what gives you the response. And so without calculating first tree row volume, young blocks are often overdosed and bigger trees are often underdosed. But the way we correct that is to calculate tree row volume and then divide that number by the actual volume of spray per acre we're putting on. That's what we call the concentration factor. I used a different example on today's presentation. Usually I use a tree row volume of 200, but many of the tall spindle new type of blocks are closer to 150 tree row volume. And often growers spray half of that. They spray 75 gallons. But again, in that ratio, it's a concentration factor of 2. So let me use the example I'm suggesting for Honeycrisp. If I want 3 ounces of NAA, I multiply that by the concentration factor. That gives me 6 ounces of NA per 100 gallons. Each of my spray tanks has 500 gallons. I multiply that by 5 to get 30 ounces. per spray tank. Now think about that for a moment. If you're only spraying 75 gallons on an acre, that 500-gallon spray tank is going to cover almost 7 acres. So that 30 ounces that's in the tank gets spread over almost 7 acres, and that's basically 4 ounces to the acre. Because we want 3 ounces per 100, but the trees are 150-gallon trees, so they're 1.5. So that we should be putting on 4 ounces to the acre, and that's how you get that. Now, Maxell is not a different, but it's a much more shocking amount that goes in. If you put on 64 ounces of Maxell with a concentration factor of 2, that's a full gallon of Maxell for every 100 gallons, and you got 5 of those in a sprayer. So you got to put on 5 gallons of Maxell per spray tank. You're dumping in a lot of gallons of Maxell in each sprayer. Now, if you accept what I'm suggesting for the bad carbohydrate balance and you increase the rate by 30%, that's going to be another 1.5 gallons of Maxell going in that spray tank. So that's going to be 6.5 gallons of Maxell going in a spray tank. And that's what I would suggest for heavy set Gala and heavy set Empire, heavy set Red Delicious, and heavy set Fuji. Now, in the NAA example, I forgot to say that, you know, if you're just going to the straight 3-ounce rate, that's one thing. But if you accept this recommendation to put an extra 30% in there, then you, instead of 30 ounces per spray tank, you're going to put in almost 40. You're going to put in 39 ounces per spray tank. But that will really help you on a year like this, where we have no carbohydrate deficit to help us. Now, Carbaryl is a little different because it's not soluble more than a pint per 100. But I still suggest you put on the 2 pints per 100 rate and hope we get a little bit of rain or dews or moisture to re-wet that extra Carbaryl that's on the leaf and get more thinning out of it. So in this case, I'm suggesting 2 pints of Carbaryl per 100 gallons. We don't use a concentration factor here. We just multiply it by 5 because there's 500 gallons in my sprayer. I'm putting on 10 pints of Carbaryl in the spray tank. That's 1.5 gallons that goes in each sprayer. So just keep that in mind. You can decide whether you want to accept what I'm suggesting, or if you chicken out and back off. I hope that you'll be brave and go forward, especially where there's good set. But I have to also put in this caution. If you see what Mike was seeing in some blocks where the set's not that great, or you got really good thinning from your pedal fall sprayer, you might not want to put in as much as I'm suggesting here. But certainly for heavy set Galas, this is really what you should do. A couple of other minor points, but since we often overthin the bottoms, and Mike has already seen some bottoms already thinned down or more than thinned to what we need, don't put very much spray in the bottom. Turn off all the bottom nozzles except one and put almost all the spray in the top half of the tree. And then the last point is Regulate. Where you need thinning, in addition or separately to increasing the rate by 30%, the addition of Regulate whenever NAA is used is really helpful. Now, Regulate doesn't really help Maxell, but it really helps NAA. So with Honeycrisp, where you have a very high crop load, just because it was an on year and maybe you didn't prune it as hard as you should have, adding some Regulate to the tank with Honeycrisp will really help. So I've said this all before, but I put in this last summary slide of what your options are. The best timing, according to the model, begins today, but it's a crummy day. Tomorrow's a crummy day. Saturday's a crummy day, but it goes all the way through Tuesday, May 27th. So wait, spray Monday or Tuesday. But even then, the relatively cool weather is going to give us a carbohydrate surplus and poor thinning. So it's going to mute the response of either NAA and 7 or Maxell and 7. this requires that where you've got good set, you have to use full rates this year and put in that second pint of carbaryl per 100 gallons and use Regulate at 1 pint per 100 when you have NAA mixes, especially on Honeycrisp. Now, in my opinion, this spray is essential for Gala. 2 years ago in Western New York, we got in a situation where at the main thinning timing, we had a surplus of carbohydrates and we just couldn't thin Gala. And people ended up with tremendous hand thinning jobs. So the aggressiveness I'm suggesting is based upon a good set of Gala, which this spray is essential. Now, for many other varieties, Macintosh, Empire, Honeycrisp, Macallan, Cortland, this spray is very valuable, but it's not quite as critical as it is with Honeycrisp. I end with this little review. That coming up in another week or so, we're going to need to start the ethereal sprays. When fruits get to be about 15 to 18 millimeters, go through with a low dose of ethereal, then repeat that every week or every 10 days. You can stretch it out, but throughout the month of June, put on those ethereal sprays weekly. 1 pint to the acre, except for the first one, which is a half pint to the acre. And that's the end of my presentation today. I hope it was helpful, and now I'd be happy to answer any questions or discuss anything else you'd like to talk about.
All right, thank you, Terrence. Questions for Terrence, Jay?
Terrence, if we get into a seed, and I'm sitting here in Saratoga County now, but I know down south, we're in a critical situation where we're gonna have to start using some seed. What kind of rates are you suggesting by itself and or Anguilas in combination with Maxell?
Mike, could you repeat the question? It's hard to hear.
Sure, yep. Jay was asking about Exceed for people that are further south that are starting to get to that 16 millimeter point. What rate recommendations would you have for Gala in particular if you were to use Exceed alone or in combination with Maxell?
I thought that was your voice, Jay. Well, first, I know Vela doesn't like me to say this, but I don't think Exceed alone works very well. I would never use it alone. But we've had very good success with it at the 16 millimeters when we combine it with the Maxell. And what we've done is the Maxell at the 64 ounce rate and Exceed at the 13.5 ounce rate per 100 tree row volume dilute using the same calculations I did earlier. Now the ounces of Exceed is a solid product versus the ounces of Maxell as a liquid, but 13.5 ounces of the Exceed is what I'd suggest.
Any carbo in that combination?
What was that, Mike?
Will you mix any carb rolling with that?
So we have done Maxell and carbaryl many years, and unless we put oil with it, we just don't get the thinning at 16 millimeters. First, let me say NAA loses its effectiveness completely about 14 millimeters. So there's no benefit to putting any NAA on. Now, if you start it as a return bloom treatment, that's useful, but don't consider NAA at those big fruit sizes. So we've tried Maxell and 7, Maxell and Exceed, and the 3-way combination. It doesn't seem that carbaryl really helps the Maxell plus Exceed, so I wouldn't put it in.
Can you tell him that if I sell any of that, I'll be eating steak for about a month?
Say it again.
I'll be eating steak for about a month if I can sell it in the combination.
He says he'll be eating steak for a month if he can sell that combo, Terrence.
Oh, the Maxell and Exceed?
Yep.
Well, I know it's an expensive combo, but it's been very effective. We tried everything we can think of at the 16 to 18 millimeters, and nothing ever works very well. Now, next year we'll have a different product called Brevis that also works at that timing. I don't know its price, but both of those are ones we'll be recommending going forward.
Mike, since we're already updating carbaryl rates to a quart, we're looking for insecticidal activity at maybe 1.5 quarts. Would that have any effect on thinning, or would it just be about the same as a quart?
So Terrence, the question was, since we're already upping the carbaryl rate, can we go up to 1.5 quarts to get the insecticidal benefits too? And will that have any additional impacts on the thinning?
So if I understood the question right, you're talking about going up to 3 pints of carbaryl, right?
Yep.
Quart and a half. That will give you better insecticidal rates, and it will up the thinning if you get small rains. If you get a downpour that washes it off, doesn't really help, but it will help. But I'm hesitant to want to put that much carbaryl on because then it's unpredictable, because you may get repeated wettings and too much thinning. So I'm not going to suggest it. I want just the 2 pints.
All right. Terrence, do you have a sense of varietal responses to Exceed? Are you seeing any that respond more strongly than others in your trials?
Yeah, I wish I could answer that question because I haven't done enough different varieties with Exceed. We've mostly done Gala. And then we've also done some Honeycrisp, but mostly it's Gala because we're trying to find things that will work when Galas, you get to 16 millimeters and they're still thick as fleas there on that tree, and we need to get something that'll work. So that's mostly where our work's been. So can't really answer that question.
Okay, thank you. I need more years of data still. I would say it's given us some, effect on Gala. I'm seeing less on Honeycrisp and Honeycrisp derivatives, so Snapdragon, it hasn't done a lot for me. And then a grower up north said on their Fuji, it did absolutely nothing for them. So like any other thing, it looks like there are varietal responses.
But Mike, in your case, is that Exceed alone?
That was Exceed alone, yeah. I didn't have
And I
that.
got the same problem here with Exceed alone.
Okay.
So that's why Vela sometimes doesn't like me to say that. I would never apply it alone. It's got to be with Maxell.
We're gonna be putting in Maxell with all those this year too.
Like, yeah, Karen, so it does say on the seed label that we use a surfactant with it. So if we don't use Nexel, and we use a regulated or another penetrating surfactant, can we expect a little better results from it?
So Terrence, the question was, if we're not mixing Maxell with it, should we expect to get a little bit of a better response if we're putting in the Regulate or the LI 700 or another penetrating surfactant
Yes.
compared to Exceed
If I
alone?
was using it alone, I would absolutely add one of those surfactants. But when you mix it with Maxell, you already got the surfactant that's in Maxell.
Okay. We also heard from Jim at the Vela meeting they put on back in April. Time of day, they really say slow drying conditions, get it on first thing in the morning, or do, as you're heading into the evening to get the most efficacy out of it. Have you seen that in your trials?
We have not really studied that aspect of it, but certainly if you get a slower drying, you get more chemical taken into the plant and you'll get greater response.
Okay, great.
Is there a certain temperature that we should keep a Nexel in the bottle? It doesn't get warm enough, is there a certain temperature where we should just?
Sure. Minimum temperatures for Maxell, Terrence, if it's below, X temperature, don't put in the tank, just, you're gonna be wasting your money.
So that answer is, I'm going to give 2 answers to that. If you're at the sweet spot for thinning between 10 and 13 millimeters, Maxell will work even down to 65 degrees. But outside of that sweet spot, it doesn't work that well at 16, 18 millimeters or at pedal fall unless it's mid 70s.
Any other questions? Any other varieties? Terrence, I want to ask, I've seen a couple new blocks. Your recommendation for where we want to just clean everything off the young blocks to push vegetative growth this season?
Well, first, pick a window where you've got a carbohydrate deficit, put on a high rate of Maxell, high rate of NA, and 2 pints of 7, and a pint of oil in the mix, and you'll take off a lot. But when there's a carbohydrate surplus, even that doesn't knock them all off.
All right. All right, anything else? All right, I think that's gonna do it for us then. Thank you very much, Terrence.
Okay, you're welcome. Have a good day, guys.
Thanks, Karen, thank you.
Just gonna go ahead and end this.